Okay, so today we have Les Crowder with us, and just want to thank you for taking the time to come and talk with us. And if you don't mind, would you kind of briefly introduce yourself to people who might not know who you are?
Sure. Thank you for the interview. My name is Les Crowder, and I'm born in New Mexico and started keeping bees when I was about 15 in New Mexico. Always had an interest in how to do things naturally or organically. My grandpa was an organic gardener back in those days, and I left home for a while when I was 14, come back I was herding sheep up in Colorado at that time, and then I came back to Bernalillo, New Mexico, and my grandpa came to me while I was at my mom's house and said, "There's a swarm of bees out back. Let's put them in your mom's box." So my mom had a bee hive, but she'd never had bees in it. She just had an empty box. And she'd had it for a few years and never did anything with it. So I told my grandpa, "Wow, what is a swarm of bees?" And we went back there and I looked, and it was about basketball size, about head high, sitting on a little pine tree. And I was just completely amazed. It just shocked me, and it somehow, like, something in me said, "Wow, I need to do this. This is something that I really want to do." And so we cut the branch, took out the frames, put the branch down in the box, put the top on it, which is, of course, not the right way to do it. But I was keeping bees. I carried those bees over to where we wanted to put them by a tree, and I had started keeping bees, and I've never looked back. I've been pretty much involved in beekeeping the rest of my life. I worked for a commercial beekeeper for a few years and had 4,000 hives. Decided I didn't really like that kind of scale of beekeeping and kind of the rough edges and a lot of chemicals and things that I didn't like. So then I quit, and I became Department of Agriculture honeybee inspector for New Mexico State for about 5 years on a summertime basis only, kind of a temporary part-time job. And I learned a lot there. I met a lot of other beekeepers, and then slowly but surely, I had a small business. I had up to about 200 hives. I had all Langstroth, but in 1979, I had come back. I went and lived in Ecuador briefly, and had my dad more or less take care of my bees. And when I came back, I had read an article about top bar hives, Kenya top bar hives at the time, and they gave no dimensions or anything. They just said this is a hive where they make their own comb on the bar, and you don't give them a frame or foundation. And I thought, well, that sounds really cool, because one of the problems that I was dealing with was I didn't want to use antibiotics. And there was a research scientist, Dr. Albert Jaycox, out of the University of Illinois, that said he'd been studying the effects of old comb in the brood nest. And what he found was that old comb in the brood nest gets full of bacteria and fungus in all those layers of cocoons that get left behind after each larvae hatches, and that they contribute to foul brood and brood diseases in general. They contribute to a slower brood development and less brood coming to fruition, and that we should get rid of the old combs in the brood nest every 3 to 5 years, or whenever you couldn't see light through them when you held them up to the sky. And so I was doing that in my Langstroth hives. Since I wasn't using antibiotics, I figured I should make every effort to help them keep healthy without the antibiotics. And the problem is that costs a lot of work and money to be tearing out those old combs. In those days, I was cutting them out and putting new beeswax foundation in. And I'd be doing that in the winter. I'd take them out as we went through the summer, and then I'd store them up and then start them on them in the winter. Try to keep ahead of the wax moths and everything. And so with the top bar hive, I thought you wouldn't have to do that. You know, it wouldn't cost you anything just to snap it off and melt it, and they just build a new one. So I experimented with top bar hives for about 15 years, all different shapes and sizes and angles to the wall and everything. And I came to the conclusion that they really worked. And then I lost a lot of my bees to the varroa mite because I wasn't treating with the miticide, and my Langstroth equipment was really getting worn out. And I decided I couldn't afford to buy new Langstroth equipment. I only had a few beehives, and I wanted to get some packages. And I thought, I'll just build 30 top bar hives because I can build them for, in those days, $10 with brand new lumber. And then once they kind of pay off, I'll be able to afford Langstroth equipment. So I did that, and I had 30 top bar hives, and it quickly became 40 because I built them pretty small. I built them 3 foot long, and they filled up, and I had to make divides. And then I thought, well, this is really working. Why would I spend all that money on the Langstroth equipment? And that basically, I never looked back from there. I became a top bar beekeeper. I've had as many as 200 hives. I'm getting close to 100 now. I was going to kind of sell my operation and go into Jamaica, but now I've decided to stay up in Northern California and rebuild it. And I'm back up to about 100 and back in business again.
Really cool. Yeah. And that's how I found you was, I read your book, watched your DVD, got really interested in top bar hives. And so you're one of the top things that shows up whenever someone starts researching top bar hives on the internet. So this year I'm transferring a lot of my bees from Langstroth equipment to top bar hives. Mm-hmm. And so if you wouldn't mind, could you talk about maybe how you would suggest somebody do that, some of the pitfalls they might run into, any kind of advice or information that you'd have about making that transfer?
Yeah, so I've done that a number of ways, and I'll quickly, one of the ways that I did it was I had a friend who had to go to the war in Iraq, and he wanted me to take care of his bees while he was gone. And he had 2-story Langstroth brood boxes. He didn't give me any supers. I had by then had sold my extractor. So I told him, yeah, I'll take care of them. And so I brought the beehives to my bee yard. And then in the spring, when they start getting full, I just watched them close. I didn't put supers on them, so they're going to get crowded. And as soon as they got crowded and started raising queen cells, I would go ahead and divide the 2 boxes, put them each on a bottom board, and give them each a top. And I would take the queen and whatever bees, a bunch of bees, in one box and set it somewhere else and leave the queen cell that's being built in the original site, but just 1 story. Mm-hmm. And then I'd leave it that way all summer. And of course, they're already close to out of room anyway, so they'd pretty quickly start to raise another queen and swarm again. And every time they got ready to swarm, I would take all the combs out. I would set up an empty top bar hive. I'd pull a comb out of an already working top bar hive, just 1 comb, brush all the bees off it, and leave them in their hive they were in. Put the empty comb into an empty top bar hive, shake and brush all the bees, including the queen, out of the Langstroth 1-story box. So basically I'm making a shook swarm and pushing them into a top bar hive on a 1 comb. Then I put the Langstroth box back. I wouldn't, of course, shake up the queen cell. I'd let them go ahead and hatch a new queen cell and just do it again. And I think I made, 20, 30 hives that way and just left them mostly going in the Langstroth boxes so that he could have them in his boxes when he got back. Mm-hmm. And another way that I've done it that works really well is to take a top bar hive and cut a hole in the bottom center. I just use one of those holes you cut door knob holes in the doors, that goes on the end of a drill. Yeah. It cuts about a 2-inch in diameter hole or so. And I just cut one of those holes right in the bottom center of my top bar hive. And then I take the top off a Langstroth brood box, put the top bar hive on top of it so that hole is sitting right over the bees. Cover the rest of the Langstroth hive that it wasn't covered by the top bar hive. If I had a comb from a top bar hive, I'd hang it right over the hole. So that now, in a sense, what you have is a top bar super on a Langstroth box. And pretty soon they'd come up and start building more comb in the top bar hive. And then eventually you'd get the queen laying brood up in the top bar hive. And then I would sometimes put a queen excluder in there to keep her from going back down in the Langstroth box, make sure she's up in the top bar box. And then once the Langstroth box had hatched out all their brood, I'd take it away, and now they basically are living in the top bar hive. And I didn't have to shake them or just, cut combs or anything. I just let them slowly work their way into it.
Cool. Now, if somebody like me, for example, I have a top bar hive, but it's not the same dimensions as the ones that I've built now. It was like a commercial kit that I bought.
Right.
So I don't have any just comb already to use as like a way to help keep them in the box. Would you suggest cutting comb out, tying it to the top bar, or how would you want to entice them to stay?
You could even cut a comb off of if you have an extra Langstroth comb that's built, drawn out somewhere, you could cut that off and sort of tie it on to a top bar, and then that would give them the at least something to get started on. And then once they start building some more combs beside it, you could see whether to phase that one out or not.
Right.
Another thing I've seen done a lot in Jamaica was, this is a friend who has top bar hives in Honduras that's been helping them in Jamaica too, is he makes a little frame that fits in the trapezoidal shape down in the top bar hive. And he just makes 3 or 4 of them, and he mainly uses them for bee removal. So he'll go in, cut open the beehive, and if he gets a nice flat comb of brood, he'll cut it to fit in that frame, and it has nails on it, and you can run a string back and forth, and it'll hold that bit of comb, brood comb, right under the top bar, more or less in the shape of the top bar box. And so you could do something like that just to get them started, and then you could keep that frame around for doing it to other hives all the time.
That's a great idea. So I think those are both really 2 good methods. I'm actually going to try both of those, so I'll let you know how it turns out. But
yeah,
what are some common just like managing of the hive that you find people coming from Langstroth to top bars usually run into, like difficulties or anything like that?
Yeah, I feel like the main thing is you want to make sure they don't get cross-combed. The one disadvantage to top bar hives is that if you don't keep ahead of them a little bit, you can come back to combs running perpendicular or curved throughout the hive and not on the top bars. And that makes a real mess to try to clean up. I was just talking to somebody in Hawaii who was saying that their mentor, her hives are completely cross-combed, and she doesn't seem to mind, but it seems like a lot of work. And I said, well, it's a terrible lot of work, especially if you have a lot of them. If you just have 1 or 2, you work your way through it. But as you start getting, up into 20, 30, 100 of them, then it just takes a lot more time to have to cut through all that comb. So one time I had some interns with me, and I went through a bee yard by myself, and they just timed me, and they said that I spent about 2.5 minutes per hive. This is when they were expanding. I wasn't harvesting honey. I was just spacing them. And so all I do is I open some top bars out of the very back where there isn't hopefully comb. Go up to where there are bees. If they're starting brand new combs, they're little small teardrops. I make sure that they're in the center of the top bar, and then I pull back some straight, already fully built combs, and I put those small teardrop combs in between them, up forward from where they were in the hive, and maybe even some empty blank top bars. If I feel like they're really on a big honey flow and they need to build a lot, I'll space them out quite a bit. So I'll pull back maybe 4 or 5 fully built combs and put just being built or completely blank top bars in between them and push them all back together. I'll make sure and look at the brood to see that the queen is laying well, and then I'm done. And it can literally take me a couple of minutes, and then I'm off to the next hive. And so it's good to look at every hive at least every 2 weeks to make sure they don't get cross-combed. But you don't have to take much time at it. You can just do it in a few minutes.
Right. That's one of the things that you hear when people say, oh, you can't do a large operation of top bar hives because it's going to take too much time. You're going to have to be in them too much, and it's just not efficient. So it's good to hear that you can speed that process up and get efficient with it.
Yeah, you can get really efficient. It's better for the bees if you're not going through all the combs and taking them all apart. Actually, I feel like in that respect, that's the nice thing about top bar hives is you don't take the whole thing apart and the air comes up through everything. You just come through one comb at a time. Now, if you need to make a divide, sometimes you have to take the whole thing apart. But for most of the managing stuff, once the summer's on and you pass swarm season, you don't really have to dig through the whole hive. You just deal with the back end a little bit and go on. And I've managed up to 200 hives with a little bit of help, very little, mostly by myself throughout a summer, and it's totally feasible.
And then I know, like on your DVD and stuff, you talk about how you also can't, how you have to maneuver the comb in space. You can't flip it up on its side because it'll snap off. Yeah.
That's something that a lot of line strip beekeepers forget. You're in the habit of lifting the comb up and tipping it so that the sun will shine down in there so you can see the brood or whatever. And they'll break one comb, and then they'll realize, oh, I shouldn't do that. And then they'll pick up another comb, and their habit is so ingrained from picking up framed combs that it takes a little while to get used to picking up a frameless comb. So there's no reinforcement. If you tip it sideways, the comb will bend and then break right off the top bar.
So do you feel like another thing that you that I've heard anyways, and then an experience I had last summer working a top bar hive was I had small hive beetles that just it was a friend of mine. He left it like in a really shady spot, and small hive beetles completely took it over. And he also wasn't monitoring it very well. And so one thing that you do hear, though, is that, you're going to have pests and you're going to have problems like that. Have you found that to be true? Have you had any experience? Like in my area, small hive beetles are a big deal. Have you had any experience with that?
Yeah, I've had a fair amount of experience with small hive beetle in Jamaica. There's lots of small hive beetles. There's small hive beetles in every hive. And I don't see that I've not seen very often when they completely overrun a hive, but the Jamaicans definitely keep the hives in a sunny location, or at least a location where it gets a fair amount of sun through the morning and midday. And the other thing is you just want to keep the hive strong. Don't keep a lot of comb. Like if the bees diminish, maybe there's a honey flow and they build up a bunch of comb, and the honey flow ends and they pull off of a lot of that comb and are concentrated in a small part of the hive, you should get a lot of that comb out and harvest the honey, because just leaving unattended combs is asking the small hive beetle to proliferate.
Do you use a following board?
I don't use a following board. It might be a good idea, but I experimented with them for a few years and I couldn't see any real benefit. I didn't notice that the bees that had the following board overwintered any better, and this was in the days when I overwintered, in the hive is half empty in the winter. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't see any improvement, and I was thinking everything I do, I'm going to do times 100 or 200, and that was just one thing I didn't have to make.
So are there any other pros that you would say make a compelling argument for top bars and using them?
Well, one of the main things, because I have discussions with other natural beekeepers, some who say, well, we can keep bees naturally in Langstroth hives, and I totally agree with that. You can keep bees completely without minicides or pesticides. That's my main issue, is that we need to take the toxins out of beekeeping. And we can't wonder what's the matter with the bees when we put something in the hive that is bad for the bees. It's poisonous, or that like even miticides. Miticides are obviously poisonous, but the antibiotics turn out the antibiotics are not good for bees. They increase bees' susceptibility to pesticides, oddly enough. And there was an article recently written I have it in my computer, about a scientist showing how using antibiotics decreases the bees' ability to withstand pesticides when they get exposed in the field. So the main thing I feel is important is to not use treatments that are toxic in a beehive, no matter what kind of hive you use. Mm-hmm. But the top bar hive, I feel, has a big advantage in that it's cheap and simple, and you let the bees build their own comb. Recently in the Arizona beekeepers meeting, there were people talking about the small cell size. And I feel like small cell size is just as invasive, or shall we say demanding, of the bees as we think we're helping the bees. But how do we know? If we let bees build their own cell size, I assume that they know what cell size is good for them. They don't try to tell me what size of shoes to wear. Right. So I am not going to tell them what size of cells to build. And they build a variety of cell size when you let them build whatever they want. And I figure that they know what they're doing, and that they need or want that variety, and that that's good for them. And I like the idea of leaving bees do as much as possible what they want to do instead of trying to decide for them.
And now you're not treating any of your bees for Varroa or anything?
No, and I haven't for. I was using juniper smoke for a little while, way back in maybe 2000, or not even 2000, late 90s, and now I haven't done anything. I don't even hardly care about Varroa anymore. I occasionally see a mite. I never see club wing syndrome or any excessive amount of mites. I've almost written that off as a past issue.
Did you find that it took like a few seasons to just breed from survivors to develop that?
Yeah, well, so it took me about 5 years, but that was starting from no resistance in the feral bees. Now with the feral bees apparently fairly mite resistant, it shouldn't take, but yeah, 2 seasons at the most, because the solution, anytime you see a lot of mites building up, is simply to requeen. And let even if that daughter queen of that susceptible mom, she might have some susceptibility, but she's going to mate with feral drones. And what Dr. Seeley showed in the forests in New York is that the feral bees they're actually putting their genes into the managed population and not vice versa. The
Right.
managed population, the drones don't have as high a sperm count, the queens aren't as fertile, the workers don't live as long, and so the feral bees are actually doing more to help us than we are doing any harm to them.
Well, that's good. Yeah. So, me personally, I got into beekeeping. I've been a massage therapist for 10 years, and I got into beekeeping not for honey but for beeswax. And
Right.
I started wanting to make my own lotions, and so I started researching recipes and found that beeswax was in most of them. And then whenever I started researching beeswax, I found out that beekeepers used all these miticides, antibiotics, just a lot of chemicals, which happen
Right.
to be lipophilic and soak into the wax, and that builds up over time. And almost all the wax that you can buy is contaminated, so it kind of defeated the purpose of what I wanted to do. So
Yes.
I decided, okay, I'll start keeping bees for myself and just produce wax. And so me personally, I find wax to be a very valuable hive product. And I think a lot of times people, they focus on the honey as the most valuable product, and that's what they really go with. And then I've heard you say in a couple of interviews where you've mentioned that, don't forget about wax. Well, would you mind kind of reiterating that and just kind of, why do you feel like wax is such a good product? How are top bar hives better or more suitable for that?
Yeah, that's a great point, because a lot of people do consider their beeswax a byproduct. I was just in a bee yard up near Los Angeles here yesterday, and he was throwing his wax on the ground and just letting it melt into the dirt. And I thought, oh, that's kind of a waste, except that he was using miticide, so I didn't want to pick it up and use it myself. So beeswax is a valuable product. It's expensive for the bees to make. They make somewhere between 8 to 11 drops of honey make a drop. 8 to 11 drops of nectar make a drop of honey, and then somewhere between, they say, between 20 and 6 pounds, there's a controversy there, of honey makes 1 pound of wax. So wax is the essence of millions of flowers. And it's a beautiful product. And herbalists and massage therapists, people like you, lots of people really do need good, clean beeswax that isn't contaminated, and they'll pay a good price for it. And you can make your own lip balm and salve. And how much miticide do you want in your lip balm or your kid's lip balm?
Right.
We don't want poisons in our bodies, and so it's really incumbent. So then the other thing is that the top bar hive probably makes a little less honey and certainly makes more beeswax. There really needs to be a good study done to test them, but so far the academic community has not taken top bar hives seriously. I just was recently proposing this to a bee scientist at University of California at Davis, and they were saying, well, that's kind of, we're more involved with the industrial, the pollinators and so forth. And so, okay, we need to do that study. But certainly, since you crush the comb, I crush the combs in my top bar hives, I get more wax. And I have a system set up where it's just a bathtub from a mobile home, kind of a smallish bathtub, and a sheet of glass that fits over it, and I've sealed up the plug with a block of wood, and I pour a little bit of water in it, a quart of water, and then all the wax that I come across. So as I'm working through the hive, I break off little chips of wax, I wad them up into a ball and throw them in my truck. And then I have a bucket in my truck for that. I also save propolis. If I see a good big wad of nice clean propolis, I have a yogurt container for that. And so as I'm working through the hive, I'm always saving all that stuff. And then when I crush combs, sometimes I'll take that out to a shady spot where I'll let the bees clean the sticky wax after I've drained most of the honey, or almost all the honey out of the beeswax. Or sometimes I'll put it right in a hive that needs feeding and let them kind of mine through it and drink up all the honey, lick up the wax clean. But then I take that wax and I throw it in that bathtub, and the sun rolls over it, and the wax all runs down. The cocoons all stay up at the top if you don't have the tub tipped too far. And and in the morning you have a nice sheet of fairly clean beeswax sitting on top of that water. The water's there just to keep it from sticking to the bottom of the tub, make it easier to pick up. And I just check on that every chance I get, almost every day, and save up my wax. And then I can use the wax. I've made soap with wax in it. I've made salves, lip balms, candles, ornaments, just little Christmas tree ornaments that you find nice molds and you put a little string in them and fill them with beeswax. And it's an old German Christmas tradition. There's a lot of ways to do valuable things with your wax. And remember that your wax is, if you're not using miticide in particular, then your wax is very valuable because nobody can find that on the large scale. It's something that cosmetic industry has been using beeswax, but now they've gotten leery of it because of the pesticides that beekeepers are putting in the wax. It's a very valuable product. It's a beautiful product. it can make as much money as your honey if you use it wisely.
So I know with me, fell in love with beekeeping, caught bee fever. Learning about bees and actually keeping the bees has been the fun part, and it's been the part that I want to do all the time. But like you were just saying, you have to balance that with making some money, and so that you can continue keeping bees and either have like a sideline income or, become like a full-time beekeeper. And that's something that I find is difficult for a lot of people that get into beekeeping because they're not usually business-minded. They're much more outdoors-minded, and they don't want to have to deal with that. Do you have any advice? Have you learned lessons? Is there anything that you would tell somebody like myself trying to move into like a serious sideline, small-scale commercial operation? Is there any advice or tips that you'd pass along?
Well, it can become all-consuming, and it is helpful if it pays for the time. And there's nothing wrong with asking a good price for a good product. And what I found is that once you produce honey and beeswax, generally the limit is the production, not the acceptance in the market. But you do want to you have to get good at presenting it in the market. And this is something I've learned from other, friends and partners and things, to put it in a nice jar, get a nice label, get a label that says no miticides and antibiotics, or, if you say treatment-free, that could be people might not know what that means, and you could explain it to them, but something to make them realize this is special, this is not your regular soupy honey from the store. And I try to sell most of my honey direct retail, so I will go to farmers markets and get set up at the farmers market. And what I find is that I'll sell at the farmers market, and then a customer will call me in the middle of the winter after I've sold everything and say, I need some more honey. And I'll say, yeah, well, so do I. So as soon as June rolls around, I'll have some more. And then they say, oh, no. And then they come and see me in June at the market, and I've got a fair amount of honey there, and then they know, okay, I'm buying 3 cases, and at the full retail price because I don't want to run out next year. And so quickly develop a market. Generally speaking, once you present customers with unfiltered, unheated honey, it tastes better than they've ever tasted, and that you've got a customer that's going to come back. You want things not to be sticky. You want things to be clean. It's good to have a good label. And then if you can keep adding other things besides honey to your marketing skills, like if you make a salve for your own massage business, if you can make more salve than you need and then figure out a good price and a nice, attractive container and then sell the salve, you're going to get some customers that you didn't have before. You're going to make more sales. Just try to find things that different. Like I made birthday candles, and they're quick and easy. I dipped them. I just made a little rack that held probably 30 pairs, and it takes about 4 dips and cut them off with a knife. And people said, "Oh, how cool! A natural birthday candle." And they don't, you charge $4 for it, and that's like nothing, and that's fine. And it didn't, you didn't put that much into it. That it was just a thought, and then maybe putting a nice ribbon on it or something. And you do have to take the time to get to a market and establish a fairly regular presence if you can, so that people know where to find you and keep coming back.
Awesome. Well, and then so you've mentioned a couple of times Jamaica. And I know from emailing you and kind of following you a little bit that you've been doing some work down there. Would you like to talk about that any and kind of talk about what you're doing in Jamaica and how that's going?
Sure. So in Jamaica, they banned American beeswax because they've heard that American beeswax was so contaminated with miticides and pesticides. And so in Jamaica, the beekeepers don't buy Langstroth equipment in the mail or order it on the internet. They make their own. That means that they go out. Often it means they go out to the forest with a chainsaw, cut a tree down, cut the boards out of the tree just by hand with their chainsaw, haul the boards home in their pickup or car, and then cut them and make their boxes and make their frames. And then they make their own foundation. Often in Jamaica, there are parishes, kind of like counties, or maybe it would be more like states, but each parish has a bee farmers association, and that the government partially will send a extension officer to their association, but they are independent. They elect their own president and everything, and they're very well informed. They train new beekeepers. Often the association has an apiary of its own they use for training purposes. They get together and they study the latest science that they've read about and discuss it in monthly meetings. And so at these meetings, they will choose to buy a foundation maker for all the members of the association. And then you bring in your wax, you boil it at your own. They boil it often in water, and then bring it to the association. And then after the meeting, they can heat it and roll it and make their own foundation. They were in the past buying American foundation, but now they can't get it. So they got interested in top bar hives as a way to make more wax. But once they started making top bar hives, like one man told me, he says, it takes me all day to make 10 frames. And he's a good carpenter. He's doing it with hand tools. You can imagine making a frame. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of very precise cuts. And he says, I can make 5 complete top bar hives in a day. So I really feel like I'm done with frames. And then he said, I was worried because I sell nukes to other beekeepers in my association. He was the president of the St. Anne's Bee Farmers Association. And he said, I was worried that I'd run out of frames because everybody wants their nukes in frames, Langstroth frames. But people started asking me for top bar nukes. So I feel like I'm completely done with frames now, or I'll only make them when I absolutely have to. So Jamaica's really, I love Jamaica. Jamaica's a bright, vibrant place. You kind of have to get out of the tourist areas. The tourist areas can be kind of, they try to make you buy Bob Marley cups made in China that you don't want, and I don't know, it's not that much fun. But if you get up into the hills, which there are plenty of, and meet the farmers and especially beekeepers, I just met some of the most warmest, wonderfulest, bright people. And they're very innovative. They don't have any money. They're just, the Jamaican economy just doesn't do much for the rural people at all. But they have plenty of food, and they're very inventive. They're very hardworking.
So you've been going just kind of to like teach people and show people how to do different things, or? Yeah, mainly they're interested in top bars. So there is a family that has a farm. The farm is called Yerba Buena Farm, and you can Google that, Yerba Buena Farm in Jamaica, YERBA, and then BUENA, like the Spanish words for Yerba Buena. And they have been sponsoring trainers to come to Jamaica through USAID. It's through the Farmer to Farmer program. And so they would sponsor, like if you wanted to go, if you've got some experience with they want you to have experience with top bar hives. And they would sponsor you to go during the winter when your time is more flexible. And USAID pays your way. They pay you your room and board while you're there. You don't make any money. It's a volunteer, but you don't spend money. And then they organize trainings all over the island with all the different associations. And you go out and you meet all these beekeepers, and often the Gapi, the woman at the farm there, will help you. Like she'll say, well, let's work on this or this, and she puts that all together. And they're a great family. They're really dedicated to helping natural products and keeping Jamaica natural and clean, and especially in the beekeeping realm.
And that's how I initially got started. I'm actually engaged now to a woman in Jamaica. I'm going to go see her today. Well, I'm leaving today. I won't be there till tomorrow. But I just really felt like Jamaica's. I love the people there. I love the countryside. The food is wonderful, and they've got a lot of really nice, clean places because they don't use pesticides because they can't. It just never occurred to them. Also, like the Rastafarians don't believe in poison, in toxic chemicals. It's against their religion.
Wow. So, you could, I mean, would it be, you just go to USAID to find more information about that, or?
You could, but I would Google Yerba Buena Farm and email Agape
Okay.
Adams.
Okay.
Because she'd be happy to hear from you. And I've sent any number of beekeepers down there. You need to be somebody who's you're going to be working in a third world country basically with people who speak a very hard sometimes to understand form of English, and so you need to be sort of culturally able to handle that. But it can be wonderful, and you'll eat delicious food and meet really great people, and yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And then, so congratulations on the engagement.
Thank you.
I just got engaged in January, so.
Okay. Congratulations to you. Yeah, the main thing is we as beekeepers you're a living proof that bees can live without pesticides. I just talked to a bee scientist at the University of California at Davis, PhD, and he said, for the most part, honeybees cannot live without miticides or antibiotics. That we are saving the bees by giving them antibiotics. And many, many beekeepers all over the world know that that's not true. And I find it so amazing for people to be stuck in that mindset when so many beekeepers are successfully keeping bees without antibiotics or miticides. So we need to keep getting out that word that yes, you can keep bees without toxic chemicals.
So I would just like to say thank you to Les for taking the time to talk with me, despite the travels that he was about to do. And I really appreciate that. And I hope everyone enjoyed the first podcast. I apologize for the roughness of it. I hope that I'll get better at this. And if there seems to be an interest in what I'm doing, then I'll invest some more money into better equipment and things like that. And I'll get Les back whenever I'm